And so what you see when you start looking for it is militarization of the society at every level. Glorification of war. Olive drab, camouflage chic. In the airports you'll see kids nowadays with olive drab diaper covers. In a bike store the other day I saw camouflage bicycles with camouflage helmets being sold to kids. Glorification of war everywhere, beginning with the president. We begin our war conditioning at the age of 2, when we put our kids in front of the one-eyed babysitter and hit the button and turn it on. And they watch episode after episode every day of Sheena and He-Man and the Thundercats and the Transformers and the Decepticons. And now there's a Rambo series. And every one of these nice little people being attacked by evil forces until they rise up, and put them off at the last minute. It's estimated that by the time one of us graduates from high school, we've seen more violence, more hours of violence on television than we spent sitting in classrooms. Propagandistic about it. You have a force of Russians, Cubans, and Nicaraguans have invaded the United States. And they get all the way to Colorado, where they're finally stopped by the high school football team. Most of the football players would get draft deferments because they could show they had a pinched nerve or chipped something or other, and therefore they couldn't qualify to go out and get killed in a real war situation. The Grenada invasion, America feeling great again, a fraud, a scam. Nothing great about this country stomping on a little bitty country that's 8 miles by 16 miles with 80,000 people with 2 poorly armed rifle company units. If you want to talk about Grenada in the question and answer, I'll be happy to. The bombing of Libya, stirring all of the primeval emotions in Americans' breasts on the basis last spring of the terrorist scam. I presume everybody in this room would be perceptive enough to understand and to have seen immediately through the terrorist scam and what the bombing of Libya was all about. If not, bring it up in the question and answer and we'll talk about it a little bit. Rewriting the history of the Vietnam War so that kids coming out of high school are taught that our cause was just. Some people in the States didn't understand, so Henry Kissinger, to keep the peace, he engineered an honorable withdrawal and got us out. Nothing to do with what really happened, but see, we don't teach our own children. They're taught in the schools, and they're being taught that our cause was just in Vietnam and that we should have seen it through. And rewriting the legal codes of the United States seriously to curtail the freedoms of press and assembly and such that I fought wars for, to defend, that we've been taught, made our country unique. That too takes a little bit to get through it. If you want to ask about it later, I'll just point out what I'm sure you're all up on. Ed Meese, Californian, Mr. Reagan's closest friend. He made him Attorney General. This man is now touring the country saying the Constitution never did guarantee freedom of speech and press and assembly. He says that's a myth. All of this that's happening now, it's happened before in our history, but what's happening right now is made possible because of Mr. Reagan. Political phenomenon, charming, handsome, charismatic, especially popular with young men. Young men, 18 to 24, that draft age, traditional age of cannon fodder, voted for this man in greater percentages than anyone else in the society. Now there's an irony in that we should take note of, because in fact Mr. Reagan has a documented record of not being sympathetic to young men. But we're not a rational people. We don't read, we don't think, we don't advise ourselves. We let our adrenaline, and we respond. And generation after generation, goes marching off to war. A rational person who's being asked to go off somewhere and die or kill people would think a little bit. Who's asking me? What kind of people are they? Read a book. Inform yourselves. Mr. Reagan, to note the obvious, has a history of glamorizing war. He claims he's seen 4 wars, but he saw those 4 wars from Hollywood, where he was the handsome captain. You go over Germany and 800 Germans fall down dead, and they shoot back, but they can't hit you because they're too stupid, you know. And you come back and you get medals, or you're killed, but it's a hero's death, and the goosebumps up and down your spine. And then you take a shower and wash off the ketchup, and you go out to dinner, and you do it again. And this is this old man's memories of war. Terribly dangerous thing, because the wars that I've seen where the bodies were on the ground just weren't that way at all, not at all. And we've got a few others going around the country of the same ilk. Gordon Liddy, touring the country, saying to the young people, and he's very articulate. He gets them, you know, pep rally, 1,000, you know, cheering and whistling. He's saying, your uncles and your fathers didn't understand. They didn't understand in the Vietnam War. You understand. We have to fight communists. We have to go and stand up to these people. The Soviet Union understands that the KGB has a role to play in society. This country doesn't understand that we need, you know, some kind of a police discipline and action and whatnot and whatnot. And people, cheering and yelling. So you ask yourselves, if we were rational in his audience, where was Mr. Liddy when this country was fighting communists and he was young enough to volunteer and go fight communists? And the answer is he was hiding out in this country running sloppy, unprofessional, illegal, breaking and entering operations for a sleazy politician. If you'll forgive me a bit of egoism, at that same time I was running professional breaking and entering operations. And then you have Rambo himself, Sylvester Stallone, making these fabulous movies where he goes to Vietnam, you know, and 600 Vietnamese fall down dead and they shoot back, but they can't hit him because they're too stupid, you know, to shoot straight. And he kills them all and saves everybody and gets out and everything. Wow. If you talk to veterans who were there, they tell you the Vietnamese shot back real well. Man for man, not pound for pound, man for man, the 135-pound Vietnamese soldier was a better soldier in the jungle than our 200-pound Marine. He could walk further, eat less, and fight harder. That's the truth. But this fantasy Mr. Rambo, Sylvester Stallone, is playing, where was he in the Vietnam War where he could have done these things for real? The truth is he got a draft deferment for a physical disability, and he spent the war in Switzerland teaching physical education in a girls' school. Getting back to the problem, Mr. Reagan, I submit to you that he's the most dangerous man in the history of the United States. I suggest that he has, in fact, a defective mind. Now, I don't mean to take cheap shots. To note the obvious, he is one hell of a politician. Greatest politician in the history of the country, perhaps, which is a tribute to the irrationality of the political process. But I don't mean to take cheap shots. I'm going to try to show you very quickly what I mean. He did, in fact, say you could always call back the cruise missiles. Now, we don't want to take his statements out of context and be unfair. He said B-52s, cruisers, and submarines, you can always call them back. You can call back a B-52. You can call back a submarine. A cruise missile is programmed to read the terrain as it goes in at treetop level. It's not programmed to read the reverse terrain and come back out. It does not have landing gear. When it lands, it goes boom. I wouldn't want to call one back. Helen Caldecott, in her last book, she titled Missile Envy. She records a conversation with Mr. Reagan. His daughter heard her speak and said, you got to talk to the old man, and set it up, and Helen talked to him in the Oval Office. And she records the conversation. 9 things he said, indicating he simply does not understand about missiles and bombs and things. At one point she said, "Mr. Reagan, that's right out of Reader's Digest." And he said, no, that's classified Defense Department stuff. And his daughter said, "Father, that's out of Reader's Digest." He gave a talk to a group of veterans in New York City, and he told this delightful story of a bomber that was shot down over Germany in World War II. One of the crew members was injured, wounded. He couldn't jump out. The others decided not to leave their buddy, so they all went in together and crashed, and they were all killed. Now, these were veterans, including pilots, and they said afterwards, "Wait a minute. If the plane crashed and they were all killed, how do we know all these details about what happened?" So they researched it, and there was no record of any such thing happening in World War II in Germany, but it was the plot of a movie that Mr. Reagan had been part of at that time. And then it starts to get serious. To give you a couple of things that you would be well aware of, being here in California, his famous bloodbath quote in 1970, when he was asked about the violence, the demonstrations on campuses protesting the Vietnam War, and he said, "If there has to be a bloodbath, let's get it over with." And then to make sure that he had not been misunderstood, because there was an outcry, he said it again 3 days later. If there has to be a bloodbath. He was not talking about a bloodbath of Vietnamese, getting that over with. He was talking about a bloodbath of our own young people in our own country, in our own campuses. And he was not bluffing. He did call out the National Guard, and they did shoot people. And then there's his botulism quote, when he was asked about his reaction to the Symbionese Liberation Army's demand that $5 million in food be given to the poor as a ransom for Petty Hearst's release. And he said, "It's too bad we can't arrange a plague of botulism." Now the press went to see his speechwriter to ask if that had been in his notes or if he'd made it up on the spot, and his ex-former speechwriter said no sane man could utter those words. But he did, Mr. Reagan. This is the man that calls the MX the peacemaker. This is the man who's told us that nuclear war is winnable. This is the man who calls the Contras, likens them to our founding fathers. This is the man who says that South Africa is making great progress towards racial equality. This is the man that says we're going to put this shield up in space and missiles will bounce off of it and we won't have to worry anymore. This is the man who says that you can increase spending enormously without increasing taxes and the deficit will magically disappear. This is the man who went to Iceland recently and in the course of the conversation stuck out his hand to Mr. Gorbachev and said, "Well, if that's what you want, let's do it," meaning getting rid of all missiles and everything just like that. While one may say that's a great thing, the fact is he had not even conferred with his aides and assistants in figuring out how to do it. And then afterwards, of course, he lied and retracted it. The man's mind literally does not hit on all cylinders. Read for yourselves. Read the Book of Quotes, McGraw-Hill, 1979. Read There He Goes Again, Reagan's Reign of Error. Read On Reagan, The Man in the Presidency by Ronnie Duggar. Read the Village Voice article 2 years ago. Mr. Reagan has a historic fixation on Armageddon. Over 9 times in public he's talked about the fact that we are now living out Armageddon. We're all playing our roles in Armageddon. The difference, of course, is that he's the one with the finger on the button that can make it all happen. What makes him so ultimately dangerous is the fact that he is so superficial and also he does not identify with young people. I have a young son. We live with my parents. My father is Mr. Reagan's age. He knows he's not going to be around this planet too much longer. He takes the boy for walks and plays checkers and dominoes with him and reads stories to him because the boy is the continuation of life. Mr. Reagan has a young grandson that he has never seen, held, hugged, bounced on his knee. Last spring, they made a big deal in the press when Mr. Reagan went to see his grown son dance, the professional dancer dance, for the first time ever. Where was Daddy for 22 years when this boy was growing up, doing all of his rehearsals and programs and becoming a pro and all of that? The answer is Daddy could care less. until the boy was a man performing as a man in an adult's world. Mr. Reagan does not identify with young people. He talks about the fact that we are all living out our roles as we go to Armageddon. As he fails, as his joints creak, as it's all coming to an end for him, he fantasizes that we're all going out together. This is what I mean when I say this is the most dangerous man in the history of the world. He functions to appeal to Americans' irrationality. You don't have to worry about nuclear war. You don't have to worry about the environment. If you've seen one redwood tree, you've seen them all, and it's not going to be here in 20 years anyway, so chop them down and use them up, and don't worry about it because we're living out Armageddon. And the point is he is appealing to people not to think and not to be responsible, and that's a great relief to him, and that's why they cling to him with such a passion, and that's what makes him so dangerous. You've got to be screaming, why? Why do we do these things? Why do we have the system that we do? Before Mr. Reagan got into office, and if we survive him afterwards, why do we go to war every 10 years? Why has the CIA been permitted to run 10,000 brutal covert actions? Why do we destabilize a third of the countries in the world today? Why are our leaders taking us into another war? Why are we systematically taught to hate and fight anybody? The answers lie in aggression and economics. Macho, aggression, paranoia. These are, the adrenaline factor, the football pep rally factor. These are the easiest ways, the easiest buttons to reach in the human breast to push, to get people rah, 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 charge, kill, follow me into combat. And there's lots more money to be made through war and the machinery of war than there is through peace. The profits and political gain from military production and spending are enormous, as you well know. The CDI says we're spending 61 cents of every tax dollar on the military. The Washington Post puts the figure at 53 cents. That's still over half of our taxes are going to this giant military burden we're carrying. We're in the process under Mr. Reagan in this 6-year period of time of spending $2.25 trillion on arms. $435 billion of that is to build and deploy 17,000 more nuclear weapons. The military rip-offs, of course, are classic and enormous. I'm talking about $300 for a hammer, $700 for a toilet seat that should cost $18, $7,600 for a coffee pot, $1,043 for a little steel bolt that you can buy for 25 cents in a hardware store. And God knows how much money for the reinforced concrete, silos in which they put MXs and midget men and Minutemen and whatnot. The military-industrial complex makes 35% profit. The average norm for society and free industry is less than a third of that. And this is why they're clinging to that. This is why they set up a system. The profits are so gigantic. They don't want to build universities and schools and streets and hospitals because you only make a finite amount of profit on that. But by scaring the American people, by destabilizing the world, having the CIA out there killing millions of people, by creating a hostile world that has good reason to hate our guts, and then showing the American people the proof of the hostility and wars being fought everywhere, then we will let them spend any amount of money on arms. And that's how the system works. Nicaragua is only the current designated enemy. We've attacked Cuba, we've attacked Vietnam, we've attacked the Congo, we've attacked Angola, designating enemies regularly in order to work the people up and focus our paranoia, so we give them a blank check to spend these enormous amounts of money on arms. Now, the conservative argument is that this has worked for 200 years to make this the greatest country in the history of the world, so why change it? This argument goes that, life started on the belt in Africa with the strong eating the weak, that every form of life has to eat another form of life to survive. That's a fact. It may be a little bit harsh, but if people have to die by the thousands in Chile or Nicaragua for us to be strong and safe up here, that's the way it is, and tough shit, and so be it. But even if you're harsh enough that you don't care about the morality of that argument, you still got a problem. This arms race the destabilization of the world, still won't work to your own safety and security. The economics of this thing, it's breaking the United States. We have giant budgetary and trade deficits. The United States is a debtor nation now internationally for the first time since World War I, and our own internal debt is now staggering proportions. It's gone from $900 billion to $2.4 trillion under Mr. Reagan in the last 6 years alone. The capital and technology that are absorbed into the military are not spent building trade goods. So we are no longer competitive with Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and the European countries. Read The Overburdened Economy by Lloyd Dumas, put out this last summer. He estimates that if we reversed the arms race right now, we might not be able to recover our economic supremacy in the world. And since we're not reversing it, we are certainly on a decline. And the question, as he puts it, is it a slow decline or a sudden collapse that we're facing because of this giant burden we're carrying? The other reason why we can't cling to the rationales that we used in the Mexican War and the Seminole Indian War and whatnot is these nuclear weapons, the nuclear state of the world, the 52,000, soon to be 70,000 bombs, a world where we have cruise missiles and Pershing IIs in Europe that can hit Russia in 7 minutes' time. So the Russians will have 4 minutes warning when they see missiles coming on their radar screens, in which to call us and say, is this a mistake, or should we launch all of our missiles? We used to be told not to worry about these things because they were fail-safe. But they don't talk about this very much anymore. Just think a minute. Last year alone, the Challenger 2 blew up, a Delta rocket, 2 Titans, a French Ariane, the Chernobyl plant, and the Soviet SS-18. And it wasn't a bad year. The year before that, there were 2 $85 million satellites went tumbling in space. A $65 million launch had to be destroyed as it took off from Cape Canaveral. Soviet cruise missile went tooling over Norway. Pershing II blew up on its pad in Germany. Texas Instruments was found to be selling faulty chips to the 80 defense contractors. Bombs have fallen out of planes 5 times at least. 1 over Spain, 1 off the coast of Portugal, 2 in the Carolinas, 1 in Nevada. 1 of those in the Carolinas, 5 of the 6 safety devices blew. 1 more and we would have had a bomb right there. The other one in the Carolinas they never found. It landed in the swamp, so they bought the land and fenced it off and called it a nuclear-free zone or nuclear-restricted area until today. Submarines, 5 submarines have disappeared into the ocean. And when they go down, 1 of them just last month, and when they go down in deep water, they implode. So we have those dozens of nuclear weapons floating around on the bottom of the ocean now, rusting. If that's where they are, because some of these, there was no record. They didn't report in. Suddenly, boom, they're gone. So we have to presume they're down there as opposed to someone capturing them and stealing them. What's at stake with all of this is the fate of the earth. What's at stake is your lives and mine, our children. For the young people, the right, the opportunity to grow a little older and have children of your own, and those children have a world to grow up in. What's at stake, of course, is the unborn generations of the human race that may never have a chance to be because of our foolishness. You have to be saying, what can we do? If we're up against the military-industrial complex of the United States and England and France and Germany and Russia and the whole world, what can we do? And the answer is it's a tough one. Without any question, it's the greatest challenge that's ever faced the human race. But we have to try because of what's at stake. So you look around for glimmers of hope. Has anything ever been done that would equate, that we could seize upon? And you find them. A war was fought, and slavery was abolished in this country. And then 100-year civil rights struggle until we got the country to a point where the KKK could not lynch people with impunity. And then there are less gory examples. The women's movement. 80 years ago only, a man could put his wife and sisters and daughters to work in factories, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and he could pocket their salary saying only the man is wise enough to know how to spend the money. And that's been changed a little bit. Not by any gift from on high, but by the determined efforts of feminist activists for 8 decades. And here's the catch, here's the ringer, here's what's so exciting about that, is it was a peaceful struggle. They didn't kill anybody. And then you have a young professor, Jerry Bender, at UC San Diego, who stopped my war in Angola. He was lecturing, he was trying to organize, nothing was happening. So he called up Senator Tunney one day, and he said, Mr. Tunney, I think something dangerous is being done in Angola. I think you're being lied to. I happen to have gotten my thesis in Angola. I think I can straighten it out for you. I want the opportunity to brief you. Mr. Tunney agreed. Jerry briefed him rationally, soberly. Tunney went back and examined what he had said, and he introduced the FY 76 amendment to the Defense Appropriation Bill and stopped my war in Angola, just like that. Helen Caldecott, at the end of her lectures, I've heard her say, get out and get to work on this problem. You'll feel better if you get to work on it, as opposed to sitting back at home with a knot in your stomach wondering when the bombs and missiles are going to land on your place, or when we're going to invade Nicaragua. And she says, if you do get out and get to work on it, then when the bombs start going off, if there's a few minutes time before the one lands on your town, at least you'll have the right to turn to your loved ones and say, honey, at least we tried. Now, old Admiral LaRocque up there in Washington, at the Center for Defense Information, I went to ask him because, what do I know? I said, Admiral, people ask me, what can I do? This old man, bright, bounced up. And, he said, I love that question. I tell him, I don't know you as individuals. I can't tell you what to do. You know yourself. You do what you're comfortable with. If you can write letters, write telegrams, write articles, write books. If you can travel, go and see for yourself in Nicaragua or elsewhere. If you can organize, organize. He said, if you feel comfortable sitting down in front of trucks with bombs on them, sit down in front of trucks with bombs on them. But he said, you've got to do what you feel comfortable doing every day of your life. Beginning today, you can't wait until December when this happens, or next spring when you graduate, or next fall when you're divorced, or whatever, because those missiles could be on their way right now tonight, or tomorrow, or next week. There may not be a world here by the time you graduate or get promoted or whatever next year. Thank you very much for hearing me out. Thank you. The thought was, it usually is, that we could do discussion, debate, comments, whatever, afterwards, and there's certainly plenty of time for a while anyway, so why don't we make it into a forum? Yes, sir. I love that question. He said, I'm saying these things and he admires it. Don't I ever worry that the CIA might not be so enthusiastic about what I'm doing? Am I scared? I feel, it comes up all the time, I feel like, the uncle who's got heart disease. And at every family get-together, people come up and say, aren't you worried, about your heart? And he's sitting there every living moment. He's thinking about his ticker's about to blow on him. And of course, if I come here and tell you the documentation right in our own record of how they've killed millions of people, I have to be aware of the jeopardy in what I do, yes. However, let me point out that if they run my car off the road, I'm just going to get there a little bit before you will. If we don't stand up and make a dramatic change, there's not very many people in this room who are going to die of old age. Or to put it another way, each of you go home tonight and get out your dictionary and get a good hard eraser and erase safe and secure. take it out of the dictionary. Because there's nobody in this world with 52,000, soon to be 70,000 nuclear weapons that is in any way safe. My biggest concern, if y'all will forgive me, this is a little bit crass, but my biggest concern is when they get me and how it happens or whatever, you know, and there are lots of others speaking out, and I'm just another one and trying to do the best I can. My biggest problem is economic survival. I gave up my paycheck. I didn't get fired and I didn't retire. I quit to go public. And we have successfully lost house, car, savings, moved in with my parents, and then for the last 4 years, we go down about $10,000 a year from what we can make lecturing and the cost of running this whole thing. And I'm faced with the very real prospect of being put out of business just by the, you know, go to work in an automobile store or something. And I think this would be regrettable, especially right now, with the war in the offing in Central America and the nuclear arms race, with the threat that it is. And the only way I can think of, I've been to every center in this nation, every peace fund, and there's none of them going to touch an ex-CIA colonel. They love me, they'll take me to lunch, and that's the size of it. I don't blame them, I understand the reality. All these universities, they get money from the Defense Department, so they're not going to put me on as a lecturer, although I might be able to teach an interesting course in government. What I'm trying to do is, people have encouraged me as I'm trying to set up, God knows we don't need another center or fund or foundation of any kind, but I am trying to set up a small nonprofit office that would, one, make it possible for me to bridge this 10,000 a year. You know, it's not a lot of money. It's about what a secretary makes our first year, in fact, less than a first-year school teacher makes in Texas. If we can raise that, if we could get 1,000 people around the nation, each putting in $10 or $20 a year, it would make the difference to keep us functional. And I'm trying to put together this office. It would do things like supporting my lectures. I organize big bike rides in the summer to protest the nuclear arms race. I take people down to Nicaragua. I organize rallies and participate in panels and lecture all the time. And so if you have any feelings about this and you would like to join this little thing and support it, write me and let's do it. Yes, sir. Yes. The question is, would I say how my book was censored by the CIA? When I wrote the book, there was no law against such books. Now it would be illegal. Mr. Reagan, you know, getting the government off the people's back, has passed laws making such books a felony now. They didn't have any laws to punish me with, so they sued. At the same time Frank Snepp's book came out, and his book was 2 months ahead of mine, so they sued him, and they didn't accuse him of revealing secrets. They just said that if you work for the government, you have a fiduciary responsibility not to attack the government. And they accused him of writing an unauthorized account of the Vietnam War. And that sounds to me a little bit like a fascist policy or a communist or Russian, an unauthorized account as opposed to authorized account. And they took $200,000 away from him. And because he had a film thing he'd signed as well. In my case, by the time they sued me, I'd spent all the money. The book made about 80 some odd thousand. Actually, it's more than that now, including what they've stolen. But I hadn't signed a film contract yet, so they couldn't get into that. And so it was a little bit less than Mr. Snepp's what they actually. But I'd spent the money. You know, 4 years go by, 80 thou with your overhead and everything. You know, it's 10 thou a year left. So there wasn't anything. So I thwarted them by filing for bankruptcy. And it actually got to be kind of funny. I mean, I tried to get some support to fight them, but there was just no support anywhere because the Supreme Court had just ruled on the Snepp case. So you couldn't get any ACLU money to fight a hot, you know, with the same Supreme Court. And so, you know, then my purpose became survival. And that's where it got to be funny, because they sue you in Washington. You have to fly up to Washington and pay, you know, give up your life, your family, your car, pay a hotel, and for 2 years, 3 years, while they jerk you around in a lawsuit, taxis and all of that, you know. And who can afford that? And they just break you with that. And they're very conscious of this, and they think it's funny. But six of the attorney general, assistant attorney general, 6 of the government attorneys signed the papers against me, including, like I say, the deputy assistant. So I filed for bankruptcy down in Texas. Now, in a bankruptcy litigation, all outstanding lawsuits come under the bankruptcy, which means that they would have to come down to Austin, which meant that all of a sudden they weren't pulling my chain, I was pulling theirs. So they have to come down to Austin and check into a hotel and be away from their families, while I stall and delay and balk and take, we'd like 2 months to research this, Your Honor. And they're having to show their auditors why it should be done to come down to Texas and live in hotels and charge their $100 a day per diem for their whole legal staff, suing someone who doesn't have any money, who's bankrupt. And so all of a sudden, like I say, it became quite comical. They were sort of backing and filling. And they indicated to my attorneys, who were not very good, I must say, I loved them, they were ACLU, but they certainly were not very dynamic, but nevertheless, God, that one, he'd lived too long working with the ACLU, and he would go to the meetings, and he'd come back and spend the first 15 minutes of briefing me, telling me what, he said, well, they're really wonderful people. You've got to understand, I just had lunch with them, they're really nice people. And, I thought they fucked pigs. I mean, they were trying to take away my life, and I'd lived with them for a while. And but anyway, what they said was that if he's really broke, we won't pursue this thing. But they were afraid that they might drop the case, and then I might sign $1 million movie deal and make them look silly. So they attached all future profits. By that time, the book had peaked out. It was no longer a bestseller, although it had been. It had peaked out, so they insisted, and they assured us they would come down to Texas at least long enough to get a court order that everything that I earned on that book for the rest of my life would go to the CIA. So to get the thing away and get on with my life and write another book, I agreed to that. They also put me under a court order that anything I write for the rest of my life will be submitted for censorship, with or penalty of going to jail without trial. The title of the book was In Search of Enemies, Norton, 78. This is the United States of America. And by that, in addition to it, they passed laws since then so that now it wouldn't be a civil suit, it would be a felony. One of them, the Intelligence Identities Protection Act, 1982, President Reagan signed it into law. No, it would be a felony now. Yes? Hear that? It's a more complicated thing because it wasn't really a question, although there were question marks at the end, but he's saying that I had said this, that, and the other about the military-industrial complex and everything, but I had not touched on how we're going to make a change of all this, and more radical, as he put it, philosophy. Are we going to have to fight to change it? I.e., we're going to have a revolution in this country to tear apart the system, to wrench power out of the hands, now I'm going beyond what he said, of the military-industrial complex. I have some real problems with that. If we're teetering on the brink of exterminating ourselves because of our propensity to war, and we set out to change it by doing another bloody war, there's a catch-22. We won't have changed anything. And I guess that summarizes the way I feel about it. I don't have any brilliant answer, and I'm pretty cynical about our chances for changing the thing. I do not see, I've gotten in a big argument with, I wouldn't argue with him, he's too smart, Carl Sagan. But at a lecture in Ithaca to tease Margaret Bremen Gibson, the wife of Bill Gibson, the playwright and big activist herself, a psychology professor herself at Harvard, and she'd come down to this lecture, and she wants us to be cheerful and optimistic about all of this, and so someone asked me to put a statistic on our survival chances of, so because I knew, because she and I talked about it in the car all day, I said about 1,000,001, 1,000,000 to 1 against us making it, or another 20 or 30 years, and she was scowling at me and everything. And Carl Sagan's, one of his cohorts, a young PhD, came running up afterwards and he said, Stockwell, you're right on, everything you're saying, but he said it's not 1,000,000 to 1 odds. He said, Carl and I have talked about this a lot. He said it would be more like 100 to 1. And I said, thanks a lot. You know, I was just popping something off the top of my head, and if you've really thought about it, you know, I like my 1,000,000 to 1 better than I do your 100 to 1. But I really mean that. We got a big problem. The human, I say human beast sometimes. People jump up and say, beasts don't do these things to each other. The human race, our history is a history of war. This problem, this Gordon Liddy factor, it goes back to the caveman days. The hairiest chested, we go kill them before they kill us. The testosterone factor, the male hormone, go and kill. And it's been throughout history. There have been peaceful people, but they didn't dominate the scene. Maybe they, lived their lives and died, but history has also been war after war after war, bigger nations fighting bigger wars, now with the propensity to do ourselves in, and we have not changed this propensity to violence one bit. The world has more wars being fought now than it ever has. And the United States an open policy of war and whatnot. And it's a catch-22. If we go out to solve this by effecting a war in the United States, in which, God knows, there would be lots of people killed and repressed and all of that, I fail to see how we would really have advanced the human race's chance for survival. Yes, sir. Let me take your question. This gentleman has asked about FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that the Reagan administration is rewriting the laws of the land. They call it the Reagan Revolution. I'm not projecting what they would like to do in my own paranoid thought or perspective of them. This is stuff they have done, or they're in the process of doing, which they have told us is their revolution to have permanent changes in the way our country operates. You have the Victor Marchetti ruling of the Supreme Court in 1974, giving the government the right to pre-publication censorship of books. Frank Snepp ruling of the Supreme Court gave them the right to seize profits from books. The Phil Agee passport ruling, this is the Iron Curtain Free Society, that gave the Secretary of State the right to take away your passport without a hearing. They don't have to accuse you of nothing. They come and get your passport and you don't travel, except when they agree you can travel. Mr. Reagan came into office and restored the CI to full historical function and commissioned it to operate domestically against American citizens and American citizens groups. The Intelligence Identities Protection Act in 1982 made it a felony to publish about the activities of secret agents, their names or their activities that would draw attention to them. Now, what does this mean, the debate about this thing? If you, for example, found Agent Smith and Jones in your community here experimenting on you, your family, your loved ones with LSD or disease, it would be a felony for you to write articles in your local paper saying, watch out for these two turkeys, Smith and Jones, they're experimenting on us with disease. Now, in that MKUltra thing that went on for 20 years in 200 medical schools and mental hospitals, when it was closed down, when the Congress got into it and there was an outcry and it was closed down, not one person was punished. Not one person went to jail, not one person lost a single paycheck for having experimented on American citizens with disease and drugs. Now, if you had, for example, CSPIS organization here, just to pick one, and you found that in your midst, your Vice Chairman Smith was a federal agent and was advocating that you go blow up the federal building. This is a technique that they used in the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War days. You penetrate a group, you get the group to go blow something up, then they become an illegal organization and the society turns against them. And you can go against them openly, more powerfully. Now, you would not be permitted to publish in your own internal CSPIS bulletin an article saying Vice Chairman Smith, who is advocating blowing up the federal building, is a federal agent trying to discredit us. Like I say, not Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union. These are laws that they have passed in this country today. Mr. Reagan's efforts, which he has not succeeded yet, but he still pursues the policy of muzzling government employees. Anybody who's ever worked for the government would have to submit anything they wrote the rest of their lives to 6 offices of censorship. And his other one was that everybody who worked for the government would have to submit to a lie detector test. And that one crashed when Mr. Schultz said, "Not me. The day comes they don't trust me, I'll quit." And I'm sure, people below his rank might feel the same way. And it might be downright ludicrous if somebody was to put Mr. Reagan on while you take a test. The Grenada operation, exclusion of the press from Grenada, putting out over national television what the Army War office had filmed of what was happening in Grenada. And they did not film the truth. The Seidel Commission after Grenada agreeing that in the next invasion there would be a press pool. The New York Times, everybody would put up reps who would go in with the landing force and would publish through the landing force commanders, telegraph offices, accounts that were censored, but accounts of the landing force of what was happening. The preemptive strikes bill. Secretary Schultz submitted this in 1984. He did not succeed in selling it. They haven't retracted it. They've submitted it in different forms, getting congressmen and senators to submit it since then. This is the one where he said that terrorism is such a threat that we have to have special laws to cope with it, that we have to be able to go in and strike preemptively against people who are preparing to strike, i.e., as they say, if you know somebody's about to bomb our embassy, you ought to be able to go in and hit them first. But we don't need a law to do that. We do it anyway. We invaded Grenada, and we bombed Libya, and we blew up people in the Middle East. But you see, this bill that he submitted would make this legal in the United States as well. And in his defense of it, he said that the Secretary of State should have the authority to put together a list of known terrorists, suspected terrorists, and terrorist sympathizers. And if your name is on the list, you would not be permitted to go to court to sue to have your name taken off the list. Now, and if your name's on the list, they could kick in your door and kill you with impunity. Now, the New York Times was screaming that this was, and everybody else in the nation just about, that this was no different from Hitler's night and fog program, hauling people away into the night and fog. But Secretary Schultz didn't withdraw it. He's still pressing for it in different forms. On October the 26th, 1984, giving a speech in New York,